I'm walking to the airport, and I see Missouri's team, and I see like Tim Jamison, who had a lot of success in the Big 12 at Missouri, had some fantastic pitchers there. I see Tim Jamison off to the corner, and I know Tim really well. And like he just looked exhausted. I mean, I think they were right in the middle of conference play. He looked exhausted, and I'm over there talking to him. He's like, "Man," he goes, "the Big 12's like, you know," he goes, "I'm not ragging on the Big 12, but he goes."
Hello, happy Monday. I hope it's happier for some of you than it was football fans of teams this weekend. I'm rocking the Steelers gear today in hopes that tonight isn't a completely miserable experience against the hapless Chicago Bears. But judging on how things have gone otherwise, I'm preparing for the worst. But anyway, you're here for baseball, and this is episode 19 of the 5-Tool Baseball Podcast. I'm Dustin McComas, joined once again by Drew Bishop, and we've got another guest on today, Kendall Rogers of D1Baseball.com, do-it-all editor, publisher, reporter, analyst, newsbreaker. He wears a lot of hats at D1 Baseball and is one of the most recognizable figures covering the sport, and he spent a lot of time this fall going around to a lot of programs in this region with a lot of new faces running them, whether it's TCU, Texas A&M, Rice, spent time at Baylor, Houston, Texas, DBU. He's been a lot of places in the state of Texas, so excited to talk to him about what he's seen, what he's heard, what he thinks of these programs in the fall, because I'm a big believer that you really can learn a lot about a team, a lot about the team's personnel by getting some eyes on them in the fall to see who's made some gains physically or in skill or whatever it is. I always thought that I had a great feel for what Texas was going to be the next season after getting to see them in the fall. So excited to talk to him. But Drew, how was your weekend? We don't have to bring up football anymore. I know that you and I both have been Mr. Dad and or Mr. Mom or whatever you call it when you're running the show with the little one around the house. And yeah, I'm running on some mental fumes right now, and it's only Monday.
Well, we're not going to talk about football. Hopefully, for your sake, the AFC Steelers continue their winning ways against the NFC from this weekend. But yes, other than that, I didn't think that college football played this weekend. But going back to Kendall, a couple of things you left off his resume: hater of all teams.
Oh yeah, the hater of all teams. Yeah,
and lover of bougie water. So we'll get to get that story hopefully at the end of the episode today. But looking forward to talking to him.
Yeah, apparently there's a rumor that Kendall prefers water with jewelry on it. So we're gonna have to get an explanation about why that happened. Anxious to talk to him about his NIL deals as well. I bet he's maybe some Queso ratings too, but excited to talk to him. He's a guy that we've known for a long time, going back to when he was at Yahoo, kind of getting out in front of this college baseball coverage, and then eventually going over to D1 Baseball and teaming up with Aaron Fitt and those guys, and they just do a fantastic job. So let's get right to it. Here's our interview with D1Baseball.com's Kendall Rogers. The guests continue on a Monday edition of the 5-Tool Baseball Podcast. I'm Dustin McComas, Drew Bishop with me, and we're joined by D1Baseball.com do-it-all, all-star, editor, publisher, reporter, newsbreaker, the man for college baseball coverage, Kendall Rogers. Kendall, first off, how's your fall going? I know, like usual, you guys are getting around and seeing a lot of these programs in the fall. I'm looking at the Fall Report Central right now. A long list of programs you guys have already seen.
No, the fall's been awesome. It's kind of interesting. Usually, like everything's kind of front loaded for me in the fall, but really this year it's kind of back loaded. Like I've seen a lot of teams late. I saw TCU, I saw Dallas Baptist practice. I saw Texas and Baylor here in the past week and a half, and I'll see LSU on Sunday. They play Sunday morning against, Louisiana Lafayette. So the Jay Johnson era gets kicked off there in Baton Rouge. So I've seen a lot of teams here late. It's been good to see some of these teams. I mean, you look at, Texas A&M breaking in a new coach and Jim Schlossnagle. You look at the job that Dan Hefner has done at Dallas Baptist. They were right on the doorstep to get in Omaha again. Obviously, Texas is going to be Texas. Once again, the great year they had. That looks like a really good team. And then Baylor, as usual, just a really intriguing club. They've got some nice arms. They've got some nice position players. And then, TCU, again, first year of the Kirk Saarloos era, it's kind of he's one of those guys that he's turned down Rice. He's turned down Stanford. We've been kind of waiting to see what Kirk does as a head coach. He's got a lot of nice weapons at his disposal, specifically on the mound. Offensively, they've got a lot of questions to answer after losing, I don't know, what was it, 8 graduate seniors last year, which was certainly beneficial for them last year. But, they no longer have those guys. So the lineup's a question mark. But it's been good to see a lot of these teams.
Yeah, talking about the amount of change in the region. I mean, we got big jobs open with A&M, LSU, TCU, Rice. Talk a little bit about some of those staffs and what you've seen. I mean, you've seen all of those guys except for LSU so far. So, did you notice a difference in the way they did things, or, was there an energy with the new staff? Just talk a little bit about some of those different schools and what you've seen so far from them.
Well, I think the most noticeable difference I've seen, and I'll get to TCU in a second, but I think the program that made a change that I saw just a lot different look is probably Rice and A&M. And I didn't even mention Rice and Houston a minute ago, but I saw both those teams. But Rice and A&M were the two teams that I thought just looked totally different. Just the way they went about their business. Rice I saw against Houston in a scrimmage. And I'll be honest with you, and I would tell anybody this. I was a little skeptical of the Jose Cruz Jr. hire, and he still has a lot to prove. But the way I look at these hires is do they kind of understand the situation they've inherited? And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a coach that took a job, and you talk to him, and it's kind of, you get off the phone with him, you're like, man, I think this guy's in over his head. But I didn't really get that feeling talking to him. He said that they weren't anywhere near as physical as they needed to be last year. When I saw them against Houston, they were a lot more physical. They looked like they've been working really hard with the strength conditioning program. Also, they got a long way to go on the mound. I mean, their pitching staff's in rough shape, but they got some really nice young arms. Micah Davis for them is a promising young arm. Kid by the name of Parker Smith is a really nice young arm for them. So, Coulter Bostic has some nice weapons at his disposal. Now he's going to need those guys to make a immediate transition, which we all know. You know as well as anybody that making a transition from, high school baseball to, Rice University in year one's difficult, but they've got some nice weapons. But I just like the general vibe. I thought they looked a lot more confident. They looked a lot more physical. They just looked a lot more dialed into me. Now we'll see if that segues over to the spring. I mean, obviously it's fall ball. You can't tell everything from fall ball, but I like the way the culture seemed. I think A&M for me was a lot different. I thought there was a lot more urgency around that program. Obviously, I think Jim Schlossnagle going there, he kind of sees an opportunity a little bit. He did what he did at TCU. I think he feels like he can go to a place like A&M and win big. The thing that's intriguing about that program is I think, and another reason why I think there's a lot of urgency is I think Jim sees an opportunity, and A&M has always been a program that has been good. It's really never been a program that's been consistently great. And I think they see an opportunity here. Hey, if we can make this program great, we're kings around here. And so I think he kind of sees it as an opportunity. I think the coaching staff hires they made, you guys know as well as anybody, Nolan, those guys have been crazy on the recruiting trail. I've kind of given them a hard time because I think they've probably been very aggressive. I mean, I would even say maybe even overly aggressive in getting guys in younger classes, but they've been working hard on the recruiting trail, and Nate Yeske, his results speak for themselves. I do think when you look at A&M though, Nate Yeske is going to have to work his magic in 2022 in the SEC. They've got a lot of question marks on the mound. On the plus side, I like where they kind of sit offensively. This is a team that should be actually pretty good offensively. And, strangely enough, out of all the hitters I saw for them in the fall, Dylan Rock from UTSA, the graduate transfer, might have been my favorite hitter. I really, really like that kid. So, that for the programs with new blood, that's kind of, pretty much what I noticed.
Yeah. Talking about A&M, obviously, like you said, Yeske, his resume speaks for itself. I think an underrated hire they got right there in that group was bringing Mike Early from Arizona State. It sounds like from everything we've heard and like you've seen, that he's made some big jumps with some guys at the plate so far. And, obviously Nolan has a good feel for recruiting this area and understands the SEC. And, I think that experience for their staff as a whole is going to be huge, having him with the SEC experience.
No, there's no doubt. I mean, that's a really good staff. And, that again, we talked about, Jose Cruz Jr. kind of realizing what needs to change there in terms of, hires and thinking outside the box. A lot of people look at like a Coulter Bostic and go, oh, that's kind of a weird hire, but it's an outside the box hire that a program like that needs. I think when you look at A&M, I think what Jim kind of showed us is that like he pinpointed what their issues were and hired knowing that, he hired Mike Early, who, I mean, I'm not going to give, I think Mike's really good. I'm not going to give him credit for Spencer Torkelson completely, but like he's one of the guys that worked with him. He had Gage Workman. He had Trevor Halver, who I just saw at the Rangers instructional team a week ago. He had one of the best offensives in college baseball. He's been a consistently good hitting coach. So to get him in the volunteer role, to get Nate in the pitching coach role, and to get Nolan, the other thing I want to mention is when you look at staff hires, and I talk to coaches in bigger conferences about this all the time. It's like, I want guys that have, especially at a place like A&M where you've never won a championship, like you want guys that have played or coached championships. Mm-hmm. And when you look at Nate Yeske, he coached and won a national championship. Nolan Cain pitched, unfortunately for you, Drew, pitched against Texas for LSU in the College World Series. And so, like, you've got guys that have, two guys that have won national championships. And I think that means a lot to a program, and not only the coaching, but also the culture.
Speaking of that, Jim obviously had a ton of success at TCU. Kirk's been at TCU a long time. What was your kind of vibe around those guys as they take on these new challenges? Like you said, A&M has been a good program for a while now. Rob did a good job there, but like you kind of alluded to, they couldn't quite get over the hump.
Yeah. With
those two respective programs, what was kind of the vibe from those new head coaches as they kind of take on those new challenges that they've kind of been looking towards? We've heard, programs have gone after Schlossnagle before. We've heard that Kirk has turned down some head jobs, kind of waiting for that opportunity at TCU. What was kind of the vibe from those guys as they set foot and try to tackle these new challenges?
Well, I do think Jim probably realized when he showed up at A&M that they've got a lot of work to do. I think there's probably a little bit more work than he expected, from anywhere from an analytical perspective. I noticed they're, pumping out all these different video programs and all this stuff all over Twitter. Obviously, this isn't stuff they had before. Mm-hmm. So they're being a lot more aggressive in that department. So, the vibe is pretty good. I think there's a lot of urgency, but you also need a lot of patience. It's hard for me to like balance the urgency versus the patience. I think we all know Jim is not very patient. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that goes in year one. Year one could be interesting for them. I think for TCU, Kirk is just Kirk. He is California cool. He's one of those guys that's never going to be too high or too low. And the gist I got from him is they feel very good about their pitching. The top of their lineup is, in pretty good shape. And then after that, it's kind of like, hey, we're going to have to mix and match and kind of, figure out the right equations here.
Yeah, you talk about, you've seen Jim coach in the Big 12 and you understand the landscape of Big 12 baseball. You understand the landscape of the SEC. I know when Rob was at A&M and went to the SEC there, they had some, it's an adjustment because every single week is a grind, right? And I think, I think for me, one thing that's going to be interesting to watch is seeing how Jim handles that every week, because no matter if you're Vanderbilt and you win the conference, you're going to have weekends that you lose. And he's coming from a position where, you don't lose 2 weeks in a row in the Big 12 if you're in position to win it. And so I think having that adjustment, I think that's where it's going to be big, having Nolan to help navigate and explain. And, we had Kyle Cheeseborough on last week from Mississippi State, and he said a lot of the same stuff. And he said that Jake Gautreaux calls it the League of No Mercy. And that's true, so it'll be interesting to see how that takes place. And, especially if you're saying they need some work, it'll be interesting to see how they're able to, if they can keep going if they start off slow this year.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting you bring up Kyle, because when you look at Cheese and Mississippi State last year, the best example I can think of is Mississippi State won the national championship. They played incredible in Omaha. who they lose a series to in conference play at home, Missouri. I mean, that could, and Missouri was at the bottom of the league. Yeah. So, I think back, it's funny you mentioned that, but I think back, it was several years ago now, but I was walking through Hartsfield-Jackson Airport in Atlanta, and Missouri had just gotten swept at like Georgia. And I think I was coming from Clemson. It was Clemson or South Carolina or something like that. Anyway, I'm walking to the airport, and I see Missouri's team, and I see like Tim Jamison, who had a lot of success in the Big 12 at Missouri, had some fantastic pitchers there. I see Tim Jamison off to the corner, and I know Tim really well, and like he just looked exhausted. I mean, I think they were right in the middle of conference play. He looked exhausted, and I'm over there talking to him. He's like, man. He goes, the Big 12's like, he goes, I'm not ragging on the Big 12, but he goes, like, this league is a grind. And he's like, I feel like our team's been in a boxing match every single week. And so that just kind of gave me a glimpse of the differences between those two leagues. And it'll only get tougher with Texas and Oklahoma going to that league as well.
Yeah, you mentioned that Missouri series, Kendall. Is that when you remove Mississippi State from the host line? Is that when you caught the wrath?
I don't think I ever did that.
The Hail State Twitter Nation on there.
It's actually incredible that they think that, like, the Mississippi State fans think I like disrespected them last year because I thought Notre Dame should have been a national seed. I'm not really sure how those two things are related, but there we go.
Oh man, the League of No Mercy extends to Twitter as well.
It goes to it applies to their fans as well.
Yeah, with those fan bases.
Especially when you hate everyone.
Yeah,
of course, clearly.
Yeah, the number one hater of all college baseball teams. I was talking to somebody the other day about the 2014 Texas team, and thinking back to that postseason, they have to go to Rice to play in that regional that Rice hosts, and then U of H is their super regional opponent. And ever since then, we used to just kind of pencil in Houston and Rice as like, these guys are going to be in the postseason. They're going to be competitive. Yeah. They're going to have talent. They're going to develop. And it's been kind of a rocky road for those two programs. Do you think that they've got the makings to kind of get back to that level? Obviously, Todd Winning is still at Houston. We mentioned Rice with the coaching change there. I know you and I have talked a long time about Rice because I grew up in Houston. It's almost frustrating to see them kind of lack talent. It felt like that program was stale. Do you kind of get the vibe from those two programs that their arrow is trending back up again as it relates to kind of getting back to being that team that everybody considers a postseason team each year?
Yeah, I mean, even though I did like the things I saw from Rice in the fall, I want to see them replicate that in the spring. If they can do that in the spring.
That program was down when Cruz got there. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to just bag on them, but I mean, the talent level, that program last year, I think I saw them when they played Southern Miss. I mean, that's as bad as I've ever seen it. And you're right. That's a program that, they were in Conference USA. They're trying to recruit against Texas A&M, programs like that. But that is a program that is in the middle of West University. You've got Lamar High School, the home of Anthony Rendon, 10 miles away. You've got Bel Air, 10 miles away. You've got all these different high schools. Rice is one of those programs that, to me, and again, in modern college baseball, I'm not going to say should be in the postseason every single year, but Rice should be in the postseason 8 out of 10 years in college baseball with the talent pool, the academic profile, and things like that. I think Houston for me, I think Todd Whitting probably got a good thing in the Big 12 move. I do think felt like Houston was sitting stationary a little bit. This is a program that not that long ago hosted, like 2 out of 3 years, hosted a regional. And I just feel like the last couple of years they've had some injuries, but things just haven't looked right. Guys on the mound, outside of the lefty last year didn't really pan out. But when you look at their team this year, I mean, there are some nice pieces. I mean, they need guys like Derek Cherry, who's really battled injuries throughout his entire career. They need him to step up. Ryan Hernandez for me. I was talking to scouts about this a while back, but there are so many prospects that were drafted in those early teen rounds. I would take Ryan Hernandez over all these different college guys. I mean, there's no doubt he's got, a huge hole in the swing. I mean, but you're not going to find better power. And, he's got a lot of experience. So, I mean, they've got some experienced guys, but this is a big year for Houston. They're going to have to at least be in the postseason discussion, or I could see some interesting things happen over there.
Yeah, one of the programs that's going the opposite direction seemingly has been Dallas Baptist. Obviously they had the postseason success last year. I think Dustin and I have noticed it on the recruiting trail. they're starting to get some of those big name guys in the Dallas area in the 2023 class that just signals to me that people are finally realizing and seeing what they do. You know, anyone who really knows that program well knows their track record of development, you know, but I've seen a lot of shift in the last probably 6 months when it comes to the recruiting for those guys. And, you know, I think part of that goes, you got to tip your hat to Cliff Pennington, the new hire from coming from A&M as the volunteer. But, you know, it seems like they've made a conscious effort to get in on some big name guys early in the Metroplex, and it's paid off. You know, a kid named Uriah Walters, shortstop, 2023 shortstop from Rock Hill, and then a third baseman that Dustin and I both like from Southlake, Ben Tryon. I mean, those are two guys that if they get in there and get some development, put some weight on and get their bodies stronger, those are two big time players. Whereas in the past, it seems like they would get a guy that, you know, was a little bit under the radar. Well, they're starting to get the guys that are on people's radar.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think the other thing, and Dan Hefner kind of admitted this last week when I sat and talked to him during their practice, is they're not only getting throwers. I mean, you remember back when, you know, DBU kind of got things rolling, you know, they had all these different arms, but for the most part, they were all just big velo guys, right? They didn't have a lot of field of pitch. They just threw 97. Well, now, you know, the big point he made was we're finally getting kids in here that, you know, they've got 12 guys that were 93 or better in the fall. But he said the biggest thing is, like, we have 12 guys that are doing that, but most of those guys have really good field of pitch. They can command multiple pitches. And that's kind of the big difference between now and a decade ago. And I would argue too, I think their position players are getting better. And I actually love the profile of this program. I mean, I think Hefner, to me, is one of the best coaches in college baseball. I think he's done an incredible job considering he's in the Missouri Valley. And that's not to put down the Missouri Valley, but you're a Dallas school recruiting to the Missouri Valley when you've got TCU down the road. You've got SEC schools, you've got Big 12 schools, you've got American schools, and you're trying to convince a kid to go play in the American at a private Baptist school. And so they've done a tremendous recruiting job. And, you know, you talk about new blood. When I was at their practice last week, you know, Hefner, we were all talking for 30 minutes, and who was running practice? It was Cliff Pennington. And I thought that said a lot about Cliff, you know, coming from a volunteer role at Texas A&M and essentially running their practice. Then not only does that tell me a lot about him, but to me, it kind of tells me a lot about the respect that Dan Hefner has for what he can do for that program. So it doesn't surprise me to see DBU making a move. I really liked, you know, kind of the notes he gave me on their club. I think they're going to be a top 25 caliber club without a doubt. And, you know, keep an eye on those guys in the future. I mean, you know, there have been discussions about them potentially, you know, going the American for baseball only, because, you know, they only play baseball Division I. And there's also been discussion, you know, I don't think this is going to happen. There's also been light discussions about potentially going to the Big 12 as a baseball only school. So I think Dallas Baptist is definitely trending up. And if they can latch on, let's just say they can latch on to the Big 12 somehow, I mean, the sky's a limit for those guys.
Yeah, it really is. And when I think of programs from the development side and kind of being on the cutting edge of that sort of stuff, I think of DBU, and I know that they just got a new weight room. I was down there for a couple of games. Great. Speaking of the facilities, it seems like, you know, the facilities and, you know, the analytics and the tech and the development side, everybody's kind of pushing the envelope there, or at least getting more money to use that. Is that something that you noticed as well? Is that, you know, compared to 5 or 10 years ago, the amount of programs that are investing in the strength and conditioning side and the development side, it's seemingly not just limited to the big dogs anymore. There's a lot of programs that are finding the resources to do that.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, you look all over the country, whether it's, you know, TrackMan, or, I mean, mainly what I see is, you know, a lot of people doing, you know, one thing that I noticed Dallas Baptist did was kind of interesting is they had in their extra batting cages, they had, you know, exit velo monitors and stuff like that with computer screens, like comparing everybody's exit velos next to each other. And so, like, anything from that to they were like measuring like how hard the guys are throwing the weighted ball in the pitching area up against the wall. Like, imagine like 15 years ago us going, hey, let's go measure what Drew Bishop is doing with the weighted ball and how hard he's throwing up against the wall. Like, you know what I mean? Like 15 years ago, we'd have gone like, that's silly. But now it's pretty standard. And like, there's just more and more products coming out that, you know, aid college baseball players and aid baseball players at every level. And not only is it happening at college, but I mean, it's starting to move down to the high school ranks too. So it's honestly kind of an incredible world. I mean, there's so much stuff that I'm sitting there like, why do you need that? But everybody's doing it, so everybody gets it.
Yeah, I think just the key is always, a lot of people have the information. It's how you present it and what you do with it, I think, is the big thing, and there's definitely some programs that seem to have figured it out. Going back a little bit to the facility piece, you've been to a lot of different fields and complexes recently. What would you say is the best weight room that you have seen?
The best weight room.
Where does Kendall Rogers want to go do his deadlifts? That's what I want to know.
So the best overall facility I've seen, I have not been to Arkansas's new facility. I have a feeling my ranking will change when I go there. I mean, clearly for me, it's probably the new Texas facility. I mean, I think when you look at the batting cages, you look at the weight room, you look at the entire product. I mean, it's by far better than anything I've seen in the state of Texas. And, I actually think like A&M has a nice weight room. I don't like how it's like sectioned off from everything, but like they have a nice weight room. TCU has a nice facility there. It's all obviously kind of tight quarters. They've talked for years about actually building a brand new ballpark on the same site. So I'll be interested to see if that happens in the next few years. And then Houston, Todd had actually did a great job of that facility down there at U of H. I mean, you talk from the golf and hitting simulator they have to kind of having that turf field in the upper level. I actually really like that. Actually, what was it? I think it was last year, one of their games I went to, they had a rain delay and like their team was in there taking infield in that turf field upstairs. So like having those kind of amenities is really neat. And of course, I mean, the standard on locker rooms these days is insane. I mean, was it TCU now has like the full like football locker as if you really need that with like the filtration system. But yeah, I mean, some of the facilities out there are pretty incredible. And, A&M here in the next like 3 or 4 years about to pump another 40 million in their ballpark. So again, a lot like we talked about with some of these products to help the player, facilities now, it's kind of like everybody's doing something. So you better be doing something as well.
Yeah, I think you just called the Hogs to your Twitter mentions, but
well, I mean, putting Texas at number 1, they're coming after me for sure.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Texas, I know you were down there for some of the Fall World Series. I think you and I shared the same main point after seeing them is their depth really stood out to me. When you've got guys like Murphy Staley and Jack O'Dowd who aren't starting infielders right now. And you kind of look at a guy like Dylan Campbell who can play infield and outfield, and he's kind of their 4th outfielder right now. But these guys are guys that would start at a lot of major programs. What was your impression getting down and talking to David Pierce and seeing those guys during their Fall World Series?
I mean, my takeaways, it seems to be really good. I mean, usually in the fall, I'll go watch a team and I'm kind of like, okay, well, I don't feel very good about this or don't feel very good about that. But like everything that I saw with that team, I really liked. And, one thing I'm going to bring this up first because one thing that really stood out to me was there was a moment late in the scrimmage to where I think it was Jack Arthur they might have put in at pitcher. And like he was struggling. I mean, he couldn't throw a strike. Like everybody's kind of grumbling in the stands because it was chilly and everybody's ready to go home. And like I noticed, like Trey Faltini was out there like yelling at him, trying to motivate him, like not being mean, but like yelling at him to be a leader. And like that's kind of one of those things that like I'm sitting there thinking like, that's when the culture is right in a program when like your best player in a fall game is out there trying to encourage the pitcher to kind of get things back on track. And so that stood out to me. I just like the overall vibe a lot. From that to the competition in the outfield. We all know about the Kennedys and the Austin Todds and the Doug Hodos, but Cam Constantine. I mean, I liked what he did at the plate. It's kind of like you look at a guy like that and you're like how's he going to play? Like there's so many guys in the outfield. Like, how is he going to play? Like, he looks solid. You mentioned Dylan Campbell. He was a hitting machine. And then Murphy Staley. I mean, I don't know what his exit velos were, but I mean, he crushed everything he hit. And of course, there at the hot corner, Skylar Messenger at Kansas. This is a kid that was an all Big 12 player with limited power numbers at Kansas. I think he's a big-time breakout candidate. He looked outstanding, hit the ball with authority, had really good, pop in his bat. He's one of those kids I think is going to take a big step forward as he's in a lineup with a lot more help around him. I think with some help around him, I think he's going to blossom. So top to bottom of this lineup, I really like. Obviously, they're stout behind the plate. On the mound, I didn't see their best arms. I mean, Pete Hansen threw, but he was just okay. He kind of struggled a little bit with his command, but this is going to be a really good team and definitely a number one overall candidate for the preseason.
Nice. Yeah. So,
endorsement.
Yeah, I think, one of the things they've done a good job of building that roster up, is Coach Pierce, when he got hired, one of his main goals was, I want to build a team. I'm not just trying to collect talent. And you see a lot of guys on that team that fill a lot of roles. It's going to be interesting. I think one of the biggest challenges they're going to face is figuring out, is Austin Todd going to play outfield? Is he going to DH? We know he can hit. The question for Austin's always just been health, and if they can find some ways to DH him possibly and, take some wear and tear off of his body and get him set up for a good postseason run, I think, that's going to open the door for Dylan Campbell to play more in the outfield, or, they're going to have some decisions to make. And whether it's on the position player side or the pitching rotations, when it comes to who's going to fit in where in the bullpen, but the good thing is that there are options there. It's always a good problem to have. You're not trying to cycle through people that either don't have experience or don't have talent. They've got a good mix of both.
Yeah, and the other thing too
is
the
days of Paul Montalbano are long gone.
Poor Paul.
I loved Paul as a player, but yeah, it's different. Yeah, the depth and talent level is a little different now, and that was a college World Series team.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I think in college baseball and really pro baseball, whatever level of baseball, as you get late in the season, what happens? Guys start to get worn down a little bit. Well, what's the luxury that UT is going to have in the spring is on for a Tuesday, Wednesday, game, they can go throw Campbell or Constantine in the lineup, and it's not like, oh boy, we're having a huge step down. And so at the end of the year, a lot of these guys are going to be fresh. So yeah, I really like this team. I think the other thing that I want to mention is this team looked a lot more physical. I mean, I think that was like the first thing I noticed. Mitch Daly looked stronger. Trey Faltini looked stronger. Doug Hodo looked like he put on some muscle. So this team, Matt Couch has done a tremendous job with this team, strength and conditioning wise. That's the first thing I noticed when I sat down in my seat at the dish.
Yeah, we used to. Yeah, Matt. When Stanford would play Texas, you'd kind of look at how different Stanford was back in the day compared to Texas.
No question.
Physicality, and now it's changed. You're right. There's some physical dudes on that roster.
No doubt.
Yeah, Matt does a great job with those guys. He killed us at Texas as a player when he was pitching at San Diego back in 05 and 06 or 06 and 07.
Was it the Round Rock Regional, right?
Yeah, we played them to open the 2006 season coming off of a World Series win and got swept. That was kind of the coming out party for Brian Mattis.
Was that
also the gang fight?
Yeah.
If this were a gang fight,
taking a butter knife,
which none of us did know anything about.
Yeah, nobody knew anything about the gang fight for sure. But yeah, that sparked one of the best coach quotes of all time.
Yeah, we've actually, we've had some guests on and talked about, the difference in having strength coaches that are baseball only. You see a huge difference in the programs that have them, just the physicality. We've seen a handful of teams over the last couple of years that have really put effort and invested into the strength and conditioning department. From a staffing standpoint, it really shows. And you have a guy like that, like Matt, who's a baseball guy. He pitched, so he understands what those pitchers feel like if they're bouncing back from a start or a relief appearance. And, that stuff goes a long way. And it's just having another coach in the program that has eyes on your guys at all times. And, he has a good vibe of how the guys are feeling, what the mood of the team is, and so having that guy that's there 24/7 as a strength coach is invaluable.
No question.
Well, Kendall, before we get you out of here, let's get some Queso rankings. We need Kendall's Queso rankings. It can be from Houston, Austin, anywhere. We know you are a connoisseur of fine Tex-Mex cuisine, like we are as well. One of us can crush an entire pack of butter tortillas before he gets home from HEB.
I can't do that.
Drew.
Kendall doesn't eat carbs anymore.
Hey, I try to cut them where I
still do.
Yeah, but it's hard not to mix them in occasionally in Texas. So what do we got for queso?
Well, it's funny. For the 2.5 years I lived in Austin, I never went to Matt's. Somehow, I never went to Matt's.
Sad.
Well, it was like a 45-minute drive from Cedar Park, but that's the best. I mean, that's the gold standard. It's worth going no matter how much you don't like the food or do like the food. For me, number 2, I actually probably would go Papacitos. Like I feel like Papacitos queso is really good. It's like
great tortillas
it's like $25, but it's really good.
Yeah. You might have to take a loan out to pay for it, but yeah, it is. It's one of those ones like you order it and you're like, God, this is expensive, and then you eat it and you're like, yeah, that was worth it.
It's totally worth it. It's like liquid gold, man.
Yeah, and they get that butter sauce with it too. Like, it's good.
So Kendall, one of the things we've been asking a lot of our guests is, we weren't fortunate enough to play in the NIL era. But if I did get a little tip from Angela, Kendall's wife, that Kendall likes the bougie water. He doesn't drink from the faucet. But if you were playing now and you had opportunities to get NIL deals, what kind of stuff would you be looking for?
Probably not bougie water. Dude, Mexican
bougie Tennessee style water, huh?
Do what?
Bougie Tennessee style bourbon water.
So that would be Kentucky, good. Although colleges or the NCAA might have an issue with being sponsored by a whiskey company.
Yeah, that's true.
What my wife's talking about is we were on the way to College Station the other day. She wanted a water from a gas station, so I went and got her like the Life water, and it had like a gold chain, like it had like a painted gold chain on the bottle. She's like, and she goes, "What is this crap? Why are you getting me this expensive water?" But it was, if you knew me, and Drew knows how this feels, if you know me, like when I go into like a grocery store or a gas station, like I don't ever look at the brand or look at like the price. I just grab it. And that's kind of a weakness of mine. So that's what happened there. But yeah.
You were drawn to the gold chain.
It was totally, man. All about that.
I can see him doing a jewelry NIL deal.
Me?
Yeah.
Apple, maybe? I don't know. I'm an Apple connoisseur.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Apple would be a good one for you.
I don't think Apple needs me. I think they're doing okay.
They don't need you.
No, they don't. But
when you don't,
when you're on your phone,
especially
as much
when
as
you
you
don't
are,
plug in your
when you charge your AirPods or whatever. So we'll work on you being an Apple guy.
I'll think about it. Like barbecue, maybe Buc-ee's. Buc-ee's would be awesome if you're an athlete to have as an NIL deal.
Yeah,
that would be a good one. So Kendall with the Buc-ee's with his AirPods in. That's what we're going to go with for the NIL. Well, thanks so much for the time, man. We know you're super busy and going around these programs in the fall, and I know you're going to see LSU soon. And we really appreciate the insight. And everybody can follow Kendall on Twitter and get to d1baseball.com. It's by far the best source for college baseball information. So Kendall, thanks for the time, man, and have a good week. We appreciate it.
You got it, guys. Good talking to you.
We'll see you.
Thanks so much again to Kendall Rogers of d1baseball.com joining us today on the episode 19 of the 5 Tool podcast. Great stuff from Kendall, a guy that we both are fortunate to go way, way back with. As a guy that is a friend and more than just a professional colleague that kind of covers the industry as well. So we covered a lot. I mean, I was talking to you, Drew, before we got on the podcast. I had kind of not forgotten, but didn't realize again how much coaching turnover occurred in this region at big name programs, Rice, TCU, Texas A&M. I mean, we touched on LSU a little bit, who Kendall is going to go see later this week. So we covered a lot. What were a couple of takeaways from that conversation that you noticed and kind of picked up on as we were talking?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how those hires play out, because those are schools that shape the narrative for the whole region in a lot of circumstances. A&M has a chance to be really good over the next couple of years. LSU is going to be interesting, hiring a guy from the West Coast that and then him bringing along another pitching coach from the West Coast. And it looks like they've been recruiting California quite a bit, which is different from what LSU typically does. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. The Jose Cruz Jr. hire, that'll be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like Kendall mentioned, a couple outside the box hires for him. And, it sounds like they've had a good fall, so it'll be interesting to see how they carry it over to the spring. Obviously they're going to get a good test right out the gate playing Texas opening weekend. So it'll be interesting to see that one. And, not just head coaching hires in the industry, but or in the region, there's a lot of new assistant coaches. You got Cliff Pennington. Whenever these big head coaching changes happen, there's a trickle down effect all across the board, and we've seen that. So it's going to be interesting to see who does well in their new roles and new spots.
It'll definitely be something that'll be fascinating to follow as the season unfolds. But I think it's really encouraging for Rice to hear what Kendall was saying after seeing those guys, because I know it's a program that we've both followed very, very closely over the years, and you can kind of see that it had gone stale, and it had gone stale from a talent standpoint, a development standpoint, facility upkeep standpoint, strength. It just was a stale program, and it seems like there is a lot of things happening there that are positive on the development side. Kendall know the increased physicality, and I've seen some stuff on Twitter from some of their arms that look more interesting than arms they had. I remember talking to scouts, last year in the fall, and they're like, we didn't really see anybody break 90. And this is a program that once upon a time had how many first rounders, like in the same draft in the same year, when David Pierce was back there at Rice. But it'll be fascinating seeing. It's super interesting to me, especially because Jim Schlossnagle going from TCU to Texas A&M. That's a few hours drive down the road, but a big change in terms of the conference and things like that. And then Kirk Saarloos, like getting that opportunity he's waited on. We've mentioned that he's had opportunities and kind of held back, thinking that, hey, running this program that I've been at for so long could be a possibility. So it'll be fascinating to see what unfolds there. But, we pay so much attention to the recruiting side of things. And, a lot of these programs have done a good job this summer. A&M, obviously, we've noted how many 5-55 guys they had in 2022. And as Kendall alluded to, the 23s, the 24s, even some 25s they picked up. I think TCU has done a nice job in the state. We mentioned DBU really making some headway with some guys in the Metroplex. And then with Rice too, some of the guys that I've seen, Christian Salazar, a guy that they got late in the summer, a guy that could be an instant impact guy for them. And we know how much the recruiting goes into this. And it seems like so far these programs have at least checked that box to a standpoint of there is some positive momentum there for these respective programs.
Well, yeah, it definitely has the chance to shape the landscape when you make some of these changes, like guys that have been going to Baylor or TCU. Does Rice start pulling some of those guys back? Because when we were in high school, if you were really good in Texas, you went to Texas or Rice. Those were the two main ones. And, now every time that these cycles go through and take place, it has a real chance to really reshape the entire landscape of the recruiting in Texas. And it's always interesting because, every staff has different things that they look for, as we've seen on the recruiting trail. And, who does that affect when Rice starts getting guys? Who does it affect when LSU stops recruiting Texas for the most part and starts recruiting California? Who does A&M go after that they haven't in the past? When I was at Texas, I always felt like we didn't run up against A&M very often, except for maybe some elite arms every now and then. Mm-hmm. But we had a very different profile of position player that we went after. And so we didn't go head to head with them a lot. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the next couple of years. And, it just gives us stuff to talk about and stuff to watch and pay attention to, especially early on in the season.
Yeah, and I know we didn't necessarily talk about some of these other programs a ton, but when you discuss so much of the turnover and the change and the positive things that are happening with these new staffs and in terms of the energy and what's going on from the analytics side and the development side and physicality and strength and conditioning, all these things, it makes those other programs that have been steady without the turnover stick out a little bit more, because it's pretty consistent about what's happening at these programs that allows them to have success. I know we mentioned DBU a bunch, but they find guys, they develop guys. Like they've done it for a long, long time, and they're starting to get better players and they're starting to develop them at an even higher rate. Sam Houston State, a team that I think goes head to head a lot with probably like Rice and stuff like that in recruiting right now. What do they know the caliber of player they want. They know the type of mentality they want. They get those guys, they develop them. And that's why recruits consistently want to go there now. You look at Texas State, we had Josh Blakely on. They've been a program that consistently is developing guys. They know what kind of player they want and that sort of thing. And even though they've had some head coaching turnover recently, I don't think the makeup of that program has really changed much. So it just goes to show you the value of, it's not necessarily a secret formula. It's can you get that staff in there that can do it enough and consistently? And obviously the playing field's a little different when you've got a Texas A&M that's in the league of no mercy compared to some of these other programs, but it's the same thing. I mean, you've got to get guys in there, you got to know what you're looking for, and you've got to develop those guys. And that's what separates these programs in the state of Texas, and why we can look at a Texas and a Sam Houston State and a DBU right now and say, okay, yeah, they're going to be good. Yeah, they're doing their thing again. And these other programs are trying to replicate that and kind of raise the level of their program and their profile and kind of take that next step. Rice is trying to get back to being a consistent postseason force. Houston's kind of doing that same thing. A&M's trying to take that next step from being a team that was occasionally a regional host type team that can make some noise to, getting to Omaha on a consistent basis. And it goes back to getting those players and developing them.
No doubt. Yeah, it's exciting for sure. And, from the audience that we typically have and what we've been talking about in the recruiting stuff, it's just something to pay attention to if you're thinking about committing early or not. Like we've said before, if it's you get that offer from your dream school that you don't care who's coaching there, what they do, any of that, then it makes sense. But, for a 15-year-old freshman, look at the amount of change that goes on across the board. You have head coaches leaving a lot. You have assistant coaches moving on to be head coaches. So, if that's something that's important to you, just keep that in the back of your mind when you're going through the recruiting process is that, there may be some shakeup over the next couple of years. And is that something that's going to deter you from going to that place? Or is it going to make you less excited? How are you going to feel if the pitching coach that you're really, really fond of isn't there in 3 years? It's just something to think about for people going through that process, especially at an early age.
Yeah, the whole fit element of the positional coach and how they develop guys and what's going on there is something that's important. It's important to pay attention to the turnover and what's happening at these respective programs. Is it stable or is it, constantly kind of going back and forth and things like that? And I got really excited hearing Kendall talk about, the facility element. It really seems like it's not just the big boys that are investing in their baseball program. It's a lot of these major programs, that are outside of the Big 12 and the SEC and things like that are paying very close attention to how to develop guys and how can we use some of our resources to invest back into our program to try to elevate our profile and things like that. So I'm always optimistic that college baseball is just going to continue to kind of grab some more eyeballs and grab some more athletic department money and things like that. And, who knows, we'll have to get Kendall back on at some point to talk about the scholarships and what's going on there. And is there kind of hope on that horizon for whether it's more scholarships or just the way the scholarships work for college baseball? But it does seem like collectively, especially in this region, more athletic departments are paying attention to baseball, are investing in it, and more, it's becoming a more attractive option for players. And also you're seeing, we mentioned a guy like Cliff Pennington who played in the big leagues, volunteer coach at A&M, just trying to get back into the coaching. And here he is at DBU now as an assistant coach there. We're seeing a lot more of those guys with that kind of experience get back into the college game. And it seems like it's at a really healthy place right now.
Well, yeah, you talk about the investments in the facilities. One of the things that I think has changed a little bit is that a lot more of the money has started shifting to actual baseball development.
Yes.
You're having a lot of places that, there's plenty of nice locker rooms and nice bells and whistles at some places, but I think people are starting to really see the value in the player development side of it. And that's what's exciting to me as a baseball person. The locker rooms are cool. There's lots of things that, make you say, wow, when you go on a tour, but be careful not to pay too much attention to the stuff that's not actually going to make you a better baseball player. When we built that indoor facility that Kendall referenced at Texas, one of the main goals that Coach Pierce had for it was to be a facility that was about development and that was extremely functional. And there is not an inch of space in there that's not related to baseball development. There's a video room, an incredible weight room, cages, So that was one of the things that, we really enjoyed building that building, and Coach Pierce had a great vision for the whole space. And, I think you're starting to see some of that take off across the region too, like you said, and it's not just necessarily facilities, but it's what goes in those facilities when it comes to the technology with the TrackMan, the hit tracks, all the velocity based stuff in the weight rooms. That stuff all can play a huge part in your development. And it is, like you said, it's exciting to see people really put some money and effort into it.
Yeah, it's got to function. And in order for it to function, you've got to have the right outlook and the right people doing it, from that sort of thing. And that's what seems like is happening with some of these unique hires and different hires that are even happening on the assistant coach side as well. We see it in Major League Baseball, the teams that invest in being on the cutting edge of all the development stuff and who they're hiring and things like that, and kind of being ahead of the curve than some of these other teams. And I think that's extending down to the college baseball level as well. And that's typically how it works. But it's something that's really encouraging to see. But yeah, that sort of stuff's definitely got to function. So thanks again so much to Kendall for joining us. You can follow him on Twitter at Kendall Rogers, of course, at d1baseball.com. Hater of all teams. It just, sometimes I get, when I'm just scrolling through things on Twitter, just reading his mentions, it's like, oh man, some of the replies that guy gets from the League of No Mercy fan bases is definitely, he's got a great attitude about it. I don't know if I'd be able to have that type of attitude about it, but he's got a great attitude about it, and he's definitely the best at what he does. So shout out to him, and thanks to him for coming on and joining us today. But yeah, it's how's your week looking ahead? You in good shape? How's the son doing? Everything good in the house?
Yeah, he's back at daycare. Daddy
That's
daycare
good.
has ended, hopefully for a while. I don't know how moms do it on a consistent basis. I had him for 3 days by myself the other day, or last week, staying home from daycare, but I'm not made for that.
No.
It's something that moms and wives everywhere get a round of applause from me.
Yeah. It's I was an idiot once upon a time, and I was like, you know what? I work from home. Like, we don't need daycare. Like, I can just watch them. And then like that lasted like an hour. I was like, I don't know how anybody could ever do that. Like, that's tough. So shout out to my lovely wife, Liz, who is sending me pictures from Hawaii right now. She's at a work retreat. Her company does a work retreat for a week in Hawaii. Lynn and Brooks, if you're listening, I heard Hawaii is pretty nice this time of year. We get a 5-tool Hawaii event at some point, but yeah, it's daddy, not daddy.
I'll go to that one.
Yeah, it's not daddy daycare, but daddy is running the show in the McComas house this week. So fortunately, as long as he doesn't get sent home from school for something, he's there for most of the day, which makes things easier. But yeah, it's like every time it's like, I don't know how they do it. Like for a couple of days, it's like, gosh, y'all are indeed a gift. And it just especially makes me appreciate those single parent households even more, because it's tough. It can definitely wear on you for sure. So got the little man to school today. Okay. I remembered his nap mat, remembered his backpack. He had a good breakfast, had some organic pancakes and some banana. He loves that. I probably went a little too heavy on the syrup, but that was okay. Gave him a little boost of energy in the morning. So yeah, we're just surviving and advancing in the McComas house, as you know better than I these last few days.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, let's wrap up this episode of the 5-Tool Podcast, episode 19. Again, thanks to Kendall Rogers for joining us. Thanks to Drew for joining me, as always, on the 5-Tool Podcast. You can follow us on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, YouTube, Twitter, at Dustin L. McComas, at Drew H. Bishop, all the 5-Tool Twitter accounts, Instagram, TikTok. We try to make it impossible for you guys not to be able to find us. Facebook as well. And we are creeping up on the 5,000 download mark. I'm optimistic we can crack that barrier today. And who knows, maybe we'll get to 6,000 by the end of the week. We just had such a great run of guests, coaches, players, national college baseball reporters and analysts. Might have another big one cooking down the line as well, that no offense to these guys, but might be a pretty big deal. So thank you for listening And if you could just hit that subscribe button wherever you go, YouTube, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, whatever. If you leave us a review, it really helps us out. It kind of helps the podcast get discovered by more people as they're kind of searching through baseball and stuff like that. So really appreciate all you guys tuning in and saying the nice words that you have so far. But that's it for today's episode. Have a good Monday. Have a good week. And until we talk to y'all next time, take care.